Hey viewers, welcome back to the King Kong review series and our new location. Let's talk about Gareth Edwards' Godzilla. Released in 2014 for the original film's 60th anniversary, Gareth Edwards' take on the legendary monster was a great return for the King of the Monsters. Hell, fans considered it a masterpiece compared to that piece of radioactive dino shit from 1998. The film had a massive budget, an all-star cast including Bryan Cranston and Ken Watanabe, and Godzilla's design was absolutely perfect. However, post the movie's release, it has been getting a lot of negative feedback from both fans and critics. A lot of people complained that Godzilla was barely in it, especially since he only had about 10 to 15 minutes of screen time. And when it came to the action scenes, Gareth Edwards is considered the ultimate cock-blocker in the world of blockbuster directors, since he kept cutting away from Godzilla and his fellow monsters to focus on the characters that honestly nobody could really give a shit about. Thank God he learned that when Disney saw the first cut of Rogue One.
Alright, we got the Death Star plans. Now let's get them to Princess Leia. Oh no, it's Darth Vader, and he's killing all the rebels in that other room. Well, thank God we can't see him. Besides, we're the only characters people give a shit about, even if we are somewhat underdeveloped.
How much more is there?
Another 5 reels of militarized political talk.
Lights up.
This is it? This is what we get for our 200 million, Gareth? Another one of your teaser pictures? You promised us badass scenes with Darth Vader and Grand Moff talking. Well, come on, fellas, you know the deal. We agreed to only one scene with Darth Vader to focus on the new characters. It's not the principle of the thing, it's the money. Gareth, you can't do the same shit you did with Godzilla. People pay to see Darth Vader and that's what we want to give them. Shooting more Vader scenes has value. Well, sure, James Earl Jones is croaking for more work. Then spend it. Reshoot the picture. Put in a pointless cameo with 2 gay robots and that X-Wing pilot stock footage for all I care. What about a cameo from Porkins? No one gives a shit about Porkins. Oh. But even though some critics and fans had their negative points, I actually really enjoyed it for what it was. And on top of that, it was a box office hit, which gave Warner Brothers and Legendary Pictures the go-ahead to work on an upcoming sequel, Godzilla King of Monsters, which will include more classic creatures in the Godzilla universe, including Rodan, Mothra, and King Ghidorah. But that's not the only movie coming out to share the legendary giant monster universe. Just this year, a prequel was released to revive another giant monster for a new generation. I am of course talking about my all-time favorite monster, the 8th wonder of the world, with Kong Skull Island. Not the book, the movie, the new one that came out. This is Kong Skull Island. Taking place at the end of the Vietnam War, the film follows a secret United agency, Monarch, as our Carl Denham of the movie, Bill Randa, played by John Goodman, is putting together an expedition to a newly discovered uncharted island called Skull Island in the South Pacific. Joining the expedition is a British military tracker, James Conrad, played by Tom Hiddleston, an anti-war photographer named Weaver, played by Brie Larson, and a group of drafted US soldiers from Vietnam commanded by Colonel Packard, played by Samuel L. Jackson. Arriving upon the thunderstormed fog bank, they fly off in a squadron of helicopters to survey the island. But luck doesn't seem to be on their side, as they come face to face with a massive 100-foot-tall monstrous ape known as Kong, who attacks the choppers and sends the group to crash in the island's deep jungles. Now the group must work together and focus on surviving the massed amount of deadly creatures that plague the island. Joined by a marooned World War II pilot, played by John C. Reilly, they must run and hide from the deadly dino-like skull crawlers in order to get back to the mainland, while also challenging the mad Colonel Packard, who wages war with Kong for revenge. So what are my thoughts on the newest film in the King Kong lore? Well, I gotta say, while it does mostly follow the same Kong formula, I was actually quite impressed with the overall look and the new tone of this Kong adventure. When I first heard from San Diego Comic-Con that they were making a cinematic universe with Godzilla and his fellow monsters, while also adding King Kong into the list, I was really interested, but also kind of concerned. Cause this could have gone down really well like the Peter Jackson film, or it could have been a ridiculous scenario like the Toho Kong films. A lot of people thought this was gonna be a sequel to the Peter Jackson film, or a prequel of the King Kong story itself. And hearing all the reports at the time was really confusing. It didn't help that there was a slight delay in the production due to a bit of conflict with Universal, Legendary, and Warner Brothers. Great, it's 1975 all over again.
Sue me.
But once things started rolling into production, I was on board from the beginning, and the final product was a great way to reboot the character for not only this shared monster universe, but also to introduce King Kong to a new generation with its outstanding cinematography, great visual effects, and some cliché but fun characters. Speaking of which, a lot of the characters in this movie are very much your classic Kong characters, even dressing down to Power Ranger colors so you could easily tell which one was which. You got John Goodman in the Denim role, Tom Hiddleston in the Jack Driscoll role, Brie Larson in the Anne role, and Sam Jackson in the role of Colonel Nevitt from King Kong Lives? Man, I never thought I'd see that type of character again. However, probably my favorite character in the movie is John Goodman's part. While he is part of Monarch and keeping track of all the monsters in the world, he does definitely play it like a Carl Denham part with witless enthusiasm, the classic costume to wear, and the suspicious attitude. Hell, in hindsight, he would have been great as Denham in the John Landis or Peter Jackson 90s version. In fact, the role that Goodman played was originally intended for J.K. Simmons, which I think we all know how he would have interpreted the part.
If we can get a picture of Julia Roberts in a thong, we can certainly get a picture of this weirdo. Put an ad on the front page. Cash money for a picture of King Kong. He doesn't want to be famous, and I'll make him infamous.
Then there's Tom Hiddleston as the heroic James Conrad. And I gotta be honest and say he fit the part of the Driscoll role quite perfectly. And I do like the change here of him being a military tracker rather than the first mate or playwright. When I first heard he was cast in the movie, I was originally picturing him like a classic safari hunter like Pete Postlethwaite in The Lost World. And even in the early previews, I saw him as that kind of character. But when I realized he was more of the Jack Driscoll type, I was like, yeah, alright, I can totally see that. This was another role that was originally intended for Michael Keaton, who I could have seen more on par with the Bruce Cabot type attitude. Although, Batman vs. King Kong? That would be fucking awesome. Like I said with Sam Jackson's character, it's pretty much on par with Colonel Nevitt from King Kong Lives. But unlike that character, who wants to kill Kong for no reason whatsoever, Colonel Packard actually has reasons for killing the creature. He was a commander in Vietnam, and when the US was ordered to pull out, he felt his pride shattered at the fact that in some areas, they lost. And when Kong attacks his battalion and kills his men, he sees the events as a sign that this is a war he is determined to win. In a way, it's like one last heroic battle to find peace with oneself. But due to the island's inhabitants and environment, he begins to go mad with war and power, and in the end, he gets a pretty decent but cleverly funny comeuppance.
Die, you motherfucker.
John C. Reilly in the film is more of the comic relief. Think Tom Hanks in Castaway mixed with Dr. Steve Brule, and you got a pretty good idea of what he's like. In fact, the film actually opens with him in a dogfight with a Japanese pilot, which in some regards is an opening scene right out of the 1996 Kong script. So props to the writers for including a scene that I've always wanted to see in a Kong movie. The other characters in the movie do have their moments to shine, but for the most part, they're just there and can easily be dressed as the red shirts on the Starship Enterprise. Very much the expendable type. And of course, there's the Beauty that charms the Beast with Brie Larson. However, in this movie, the Beauty and the Beast angle is actually not even present this time around. I know, right? How can you make a King Kong movie and not include one of the greatest love story angles that has stayed with the material since its creation?
Well, there's a good reason.
Well, that's not entirely true. We do get to see Kong and her have a connection, and Brie does get in his hands at one point. But the relationship is more of a friendly one than a romantic plotline. In fact, the whole Beauty and the Beast bit is pretty much roasted. There's a scene where Kong first meets Weaver face to face, and at first you think he's gonna grab her and take her off into the jungle, but instead, well, I'll let let the late Patrice O'Neal describe it for me.
And he just looked at her like, you fucking and he just started walking, and she's like, wait, baby, and he just ignored her, and then she's like, look at this hot little piece of ass. He's like, bitch, it ain't all about you, ho. I was like, King Kong.
The scene had me laughing like crazy, but aside from that, her character is a new take on the classic King Kong beauty. She's kinda like Jack Prescott in the 1976 remake, but is able to do more action-oriented tasks. But of course, let's talk about Kong. Again, when I first heard about the film being made, my biggest concern was how Kong would look and be portrayed as a character. I was honestly really scared that they were going on par with the Toho designs, which would have been awful. But I was actually really happy of how Kong looked in the film. The design stays true to the original 1933 creature sculpted by Marcel Delgado, but still updates it appropriately, especially since he has to tackle Godzilla in a few years. And in case you're wondering why Kong in this movie is technically smaller than Legendary's Godzilla, the movie does explain that over time, Kong will grow larger to match up with the Big G. I love how he's gone back to the brown hair and that he walks upright like he did in the original, as well as being portrayed as a mythical god, rather than a sympathetic but violent animal. In fact, this Kong feels more like a real animal than the other incarnations due to him honestly feeling very unpredictable. The creatures on Skull Island were actually a big surprise for me. A lot of folks, including myself, were hoping to see a few dinosaurs in this movie, but instead we got some unexpected and interesting creatures that, while different, could still in some areas feel like that they would inhabit Skull Island. There was the buffalo-like creatures that, while a really relaxed and almost Miyazaki design, made me wish they were some form of herbivore-esque dinosaur. But we did get some dinosaur-like creatures, including some wildly bizarre pterosaurs with saw-like beaks, and surprisingly enough, a giant octopus that attacks Kong in the lakes of the island, which is a great little tribute of the scene in King Kong vs. Godzilla. But of course, the big baddies of the film are of course the skull crawlers. And I gotta admit, while I was disappointed with the discarding of dinosaurs, these guys are close enough that they are very accepted as a replacement. In fact, they in some way did appear in the original 1933 film. Remember the scene when Kong tries to grab Jack in the chasm and that two-legged lizard crawls up the side to eat Jack? Well, the designs in this new movie are so similar that I can now call the two-legged lizard in the original a skull crawler. And in this movie, they are pretty menacing and a scary threat. In fact, the jump scares in this movie really got me most of the time. They do represent a cross between the T-Rex and snake scenes in the previous Kong films, and whenever they fight Kong, it's a lot of fun. By the way, am I the only one who thinks Kong's home is more reminiscent of the Toho films than the original? I mean, think about it. It's located in the South Pacific, Kong is taller than he usually is, the natives are Asian, the wall has no gate, and there's a giant octopus. If anything, they should retitle the movie Kong, Faro Island. The story itself is honestly quite faithful to previous Kong films. In fact, in some areas it pays homage to previous incarnations. But you can tell that its bigger influences come from the 1976 remake, which made me appreciate it a lot more. There's two moments in the film that were direct tributes to 76 in the way that they were structured and shot. The briefing scene is ripped straight from 76, almost shot for shot. And the scene where Kong holds Weaver in his hands in the water is a lot similar to the waterfall scene. Not to mention, the film was shot on the island of Kauai, where of course the Skull Island scenes in Dino's version were also filmed 40 years before. Hell, in this movie they went to several locations to visualize the look of Skull Island, from Hawaii, Australia, and most notably being the first Hollywood production shot in the jungles of Vietnam. Yeah, think about it. All those previous Vietnam War movies like Platoon and Apocalypse Now were not shot in its themed locations. So for a post-Nam movie of this scale to shoot where the war took place is actually quite a ballsy move, I gotta say. After seeing the visual beauty of the jungles out there, I wouldn't mind more films shot there. Let's just make sure their floats dedicated to said movies don't catch fire in the near future.
Whoa, 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 whoa!
That wouldn't be the first time a Kong attraction went up in flames. Speaking of the location of Vietnam, this movie is very much a war movie of that period, and you could tell that the movie was very influenced by Apocalypse Now and movies of that nature. But in some regards, this movie is actually one of the most realistic and tense Nam movies I've ever seen. Not just for the locations, but for some of the characters and tone of how it's portrayed. So my only warning is for any veterans of the war, since this film may cause some slight PTSD and flashbacks. The action scenes in the movie are fantastic. The movie moves at a breakneck speed and keeps you on your feet the whole time with each scene. From the first attack of Kong as he battles the helicopters, to the quick and jumpy giant spider scene, Kong's battle with the giant octopus, all the way to the battle with the skull crawlers. Each scene is well shot and extremely entertaining. Director Jordan Vogt Roberts' work really paid off, and for one of his first gigs, I'll be looking forward to whatever project he has next. As for the special effects, they're also pretty damn impressive. The effects reins this time were handed over to Lucasfilm's Industrial Light and Magic, who at this point, aside from Disney's mighty Joe Young, have never handled a full-fledged Kong movie before. And I gotta say, they did an impressive job, especially with Kong, of which they all used the original film's movements as the best reference. The music, if anything, is okay at best. It does have some decent build-up, but feels like a casual and passable film score. While this movie is mostly covered by songs from the war era, Henry Jackman did give the movie a classic score that most Kong movies should have. The score hasn't grown on me yet, but hopefully with every listen, I'll get used to it. So this movie seems to get down the basic Kong formula, and while it is a pretty damn good movie, is there anything that doesn't work? Well, there's only a few nitpicks that are kind of unnecessary, but they are worth bringing up. First off, while the majority of the creatures on Skull Island are fantastic additions to the Kong mythos, it does suffer from missing the dinosaurs in the previous films. It could be due to a legal issue on the clusterfuck rights to King Kong, but I was really hoping for at least a cameo appearance from Rodan or even Gorosaurus. It would make sense since this is more related to the Toho Kong films, but it kind of sucks they're not there. And the only other minor problem with the film is that some of the characters are either forgotten or unnecessarily killed off. Most notably two of the leads, Tom Hiddleston and John Goodman. While Tom does a great job throughout the film, during the middle act, he's kind of forgotten about and is just there. He doesn't really command a leading presence. I was expecting more conflict between him with Goodman or Jackson.
Bitch, please!
But one of the biggest bummers about the film was the death of John Goodman's character.
Oh, shit.
It was quite a surprise, but given that he was the best character and the one who was funding the expedition, it is a real drag that he is suddenly killed off and didn't end up continuing his work with Monarch at the end of the film. Speaking of which, let's talk about that post-credit scene. With most of today's big blockbuster universe films, there's always a post-credit scene to get you hyped for the next installment. And I gotta admit, this one is one of the best, with the Monarch group showing Hiddleston and Larsden's characters that Kong is not the only king of the monsters, showing shadowed images of Rodan, Mothra, King Ghidorah, and of course, Godzilla. With this credit scene, you can totally sign me up for what's to come for this kaiju cinematic universe. Overall, Kong Skull Island was an amazing adventure with giant-sized entertainment, with some snappy characters, great cinematography, fantastic creatures, kick-ass action scenes, a decent score, a great cast, and a director with incredible potential. It definitely ranks in the top 5 of the best Kong films, and I would probably put it in 4th place. It may not be as good as Kong 33, 76, or 05, but it's far superior to those such as King Kong Lives or Son of Kong. If it's still in theaters, or if you have a great home theater system, I'd highly recommend you seeing it with a big screen and a high-quality sound system. It's a great cinematic adventure, and I'd give it a solid 9 out of 10. It's definitely a fantastic addition to the King Kong legacy. Well guys, that's all for now from the King Kong review series. We've taken a look at the unproduced films, a new ride in Orlando, and the latest film in the King Kong franchise. However, I do have some time on my hands, so what the hell, I might as well take a look at some stuff that many of my viewers have mentioned. Join me next time when I take a look at another giant gorilla that took on an infamous superhero, so we'll see you then!